Hey everyone, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from today. This story about baseball legend Cal Ripken Jr. will leave you speechless. Sometimes the most unexpected moments happen after the final pitch. The warm summer evening at Camden Yards was winding down, the stadium lights casting long shadows across the now empty bleachers. The Baltimore Orioles had just wrapped up another home game, and while most fans had already headed home, a handful of dedicated supporters lingered in the parking lot, hoping to catch a glimpse of their favorite players. The air still carried the lingering sense of popcorn and hot dogs, mixed with the familiar musk of leather baseball gloves and the sweet pine tar that permeated the stadium grounds. Cal Ripken Jr., known as the Iron Man for his record-breaking streak of 2,632 consecutive games played, was making his way through the players' parking area. He'd stayed late that night, as he often did, signing autographs for young fans and chatting with the stadium staff who'd become like family over his decades-long career with the Orioles. The parking lot lights cast an ethereal glow over the scene, creating pools of yellow light that dotted the asphalt like a constellation. As Ripken approached his car, he couldn't help but notice a commotion growing near the far end of the lot. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the usual post-game excitement, perhaps an enthusiastic fan celebration or a friendly debate about the game's highlights. But something in the rising voices caught his attention. After 20 years in professional baseball, Ripken had developed an instinct for trouble brewing, whether on the field or off. The tension in the air was palpable as two distinct groups began to form in the parking lot. On one side stood a towering figure, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders and a demeanor that screamed trouble. His face was flushed with anger, and his expensive custom Orioles jersey was stretched tight across his chest. This was Marcus Thompson, a local business owner known for his short temper and inflated sense of self-importance. He'd made his fortune in real estate development and never missed an opportunity to remind others of his success. Opposite Thompson stood a much smaller man, probably in his mid-60s, wearing a well-worn Orioles cap that had clearly seen better days. His grandson, no more than 12 years old, clutched his grandfather's hand tightly, his eyes wide with fear as the confrontation escalated. The older man's car, a modest sedan that had clearly been around since the Orioles' glory days of the early 80s, was blocked in by Thompson's gleaming luxury SUV. "You scratched my car, old man," Thompson's voice boomed across the lot, drawing more attention from the remaining fans and security personnel who were beginning to take notice. "Do you have any idea how much this vehicle costs? More than you probably make in a year." The older man's voice trembled slightly, but there was dignity in his response. "Sir, I assure you, we didn't touch your car. We've been standing here waiting for you to move so we could leave." His grandson pressed closer to his side, the boy's baseball glove clutched tightly against his chest like a shield. Thompson took a menacing step forward, his face contorted with rage. "Are you calling me a liar? I saw you backing up near my car. There's a scratch right there." He pointed dramatically at his vehicle, though from where Ripken stood, no damage was visible on the pristine black paint. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. A small crowd had gathered, some filming with their phones, others murmuring among themselves. Security seemed hesitant to intervene, perhaps intimidated by Thompson's status as a prominent local figure. The old man stood his ground, but his grandson was beginning to cry silently, tears rolling down his cheeks. What happened next would become the stuff of Baltimore legend, a story passed down among Orioles fans for generations to come. Cal Ripken Jr., the man who had faced down the greatest pitchers in baseball history, who had played through injuries and exhaustion to set one of sport's most unbreakable records, began walking purposefully toward the confrontation. The crowd parted instinctively as Ripken approached, his presence commanding respect without a word being spoken. He moved with the same quiet confidence that had characterized his entire career, no wasted motion, no dramatic flourishes, just pure purpose in every step. Those who noticed him first fell silent, their attention shifting from the confrontation to the baseball legend in their midst. Thompson was too engrossed in his tirade to notice Ripken's approach at first. "I'll have you know I'm a personal friend of the team owner," he was saying, his voice getting louder with each word. "One phone call from me, and you'll never set foot in this stadium again." The old man's response was dignified but firm. "Sir, my grandson and I have been coming to Orioles games for years. We respect this place. We would never damage anyone's property." His voice caught slightly as he added, "This is supposed to be a place of joy, not confrontation." It was at this moment that Cal Ripken Jr. cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a well-timed fastball through the strike zone. Thompson turned, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption, only to freeze when he recognized who was standing there. The Iron Man's presence was impossible to ignore. He stood there in his post-game attire, his eyes taking in the scene with the same calculated awareness that had made him one of baseball's greatest strategic minds. The crowd held its collective breath, phones still recording, as history unfolded before them. "Is there a problem here?" Ripken's voice was calm but carried the weight of authority earned through years of leadership both on and off the field. His gaze shifted between Thompson and the older man, assessing the situation with the same precision he'd used to read pitchers throughout his career. Thompson's demeanor changed instantly, his face breaking into an ingratiating smile. "Mr. Ripken, what an honor. I was just explaining to this gentleman about the damage to my vehicle." He gestured toward his SUV, his movements suddenly less aggressive, more controlled. Ripken nodded thoughtfully, then walked over to inspect the supposed damage. He moved around the vehicle methodically, his eyes scanning every inch of the surface. The crowd watched in silence, many still recording as baseball's Iron Man conducted his investigation. Finally, he straightened up and turned to face Thompson. "You know, Mr. Thompson," Ripken began, his voice carrying easily across the now silent parking lot, "I've been watching this spot for the past 15 minutes from over there." He gestured toward his own parking space. "This gentleman and his grandson haven't moved their car. They've been waiting patiently for you to return so they could leave." Thompson's face reddened, but before he could speak, Ripken continued. "I've always believed that baseball is more than just a game. It's about respect, integrity, and bringing people together. When I played those 2,632 consecutive games, it wasn't just about showing up, it was about setting an example of dedication and responsibility." The crowd had grown larger now, with several security guards moving closer, their postures more relaxed but attentive. Thompson's bluster was deflating visibly with each passing moment, his earlier confidence evaporating under Ripken's steady gaze. "Sir," Ripken addressed the older man, "I couldn't help but notice your grandson's glove. That's a good-looking mitt you've got there, young man." He smiled at the boy, whose tears had stopped as he stared in awe at his baseball hero. "Have you been practicing your catches?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, his earlier fear forgotten. "Yes, sir. Grandpa's been teaching me. We watch old videos of you playing all the time." Ripken's smile widened. "Is that right? Well, how about this? Why don't you and your grandfather join me for batting practice before tomorrow's game? I'd love to see what you've learned." The boy's face lit up like the stadium lights themselves, his grandfather's eyes glistening with emotion. Thompson stood awkwardly to the side, his anger completely deflated, replaced by evident embarrassment. "Mr. Thompson," Ripken turned back to the businessman, his voice firm but not unkind, "I believe you've parked in a way that's blocking these folks from leaving. Would you mind moving your vehicle? And perhaps we could all remember that what happens in this parking lot reflects on our entire Orioles community." Thompson mumbled an apology and quickly moved toward his SUV, the fight completely gone from his demeanor. As he slid behind the wheel, Ripken placed a gentle hand on the older man's shoulder. "Sir, I'd be honored if you and your grandson would join me tomorrow. Baseball has always been about passing down traditions, teaching the next generation not just about the game, but about what it means to be part of something bigger than ourselves." The grandfather's voice was thick with emotion as he replied, "Mr. Ripken, you've always been a hero to us, but tonight you showed us why you're not just a baseball legend, but a true role model." As Thompson's SUV pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, many of them sharing knowing looks and satisfied smiles. They had witnessed something special, not just the defusing of a tense situation, but a demonstration of the values that made baseball America's pastime. Ripken stayed for a few more minutes, chatting with the grandfather and grandson, sharing stories and offering words of encouragement to the young ball player. As they finally parted ways, the parking lot had nearly emptied, but the impact of what had transpired would resonate far beyond that summer evening. The videos taken by onlookers would eventually make their way online, but they wouldn't capture the full essence of what happened that night. They couldn't fully convey the quiet strength that Cal Ripken Jr. brought to the situation, or the way he transformed a moment of conflict into an opportunity for teaching and connection. As the last cars pulled out of the lot, the stadium lights began to dim, but the lesson learned that evening would shine brightly in the memories of all who witnessed it. Sometimes the greatest moments in baseball happen long after the final out, in the quiet moments when character reveals itself in unexpected ways. Have you ever witnessed a sports legend step up in real life to help others? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories from the world of sports. The story of Cal Ripken Jr.'s intervention in the parking lot confrontations spread quickly through Baltimore's tight-knit baseball community. But what happened next would reveal layers of complexity that no one could have anticipated that summer evening. As the stadium lights dimmed and the last few cars trickled out of the parking lot, a new chapter in this remarkable tale was about to unfold. Marcus Thompson, the businessman whose confrontational behavior had sparked the incident, sat in his luxury SUV at a nearby coffee shop, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The embarrassment of being called out by Cal Ripken Jr. himself had struck deeper than any business setback he'd ever faced. But there was more to Thompson's story than met the eye, and the events of that evening had stirred memories he'd spent years trying to suppress. Security camera footage from the parking lot would later reveal something that none of the onlookers had noticed during the confrontation. In the moments before Thompson had accused the elderly man of scratching his car, he had received a phone call. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, but those who knew Thompson well would have recognized the subtle change in his demeanor, the way his shoulders tensed, how his free hand clenched into a fist. The following morning, as Baltimore awakened to another humid summer day, the grandfather and grandson arrived at Camden Yards for their promised batting practice with Cal Ripken Jr. The young boy, Tommy Anderson, could barely contain his excitement as they approached the player's entrance. His grandfather, Robert Anderson, walked with a slight limp, a reminder of his own baseball career cut short by injury decades ago. What nobody knew at the time was that Robert Anderson wasn't just any baseball fan. In the early 1970s, he had been a promising pitcher in the Orioles minor league system, playing alongside Cal Ripken Sr., Cal Jr.'s father. An injury in what should have been his breakthrough season had ended his professional dreams, but not his love for the game. He had never mentioned this connection during the previous night's confrontation, choosing instead to maintain his dignity in the face of Thompson's aggression. As the Andersons entered the stadium, they were greeted by the familiar sound of batting practice, the crack of bats, the pop of balls hitting gloves, the easy banter of players warming up for another day at the ballpark. Cal Ripken Jr. was already there, talking with some of the coaching staff, but he immediately walked over to greet them with the same warm presence he'd shown the night before. "Welcome to our house," Ripken said, shaking Robert's hand and giving Tommy a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Ready to show me what you've got, young man?" What happened next would become another chapter in Baltimore baseball lore. As Tommy took his stance in the batting cage, Ripken noticed something familiar in the boy's grip, the way he positioned his feet. He glanced at Robert, a question in his eyes. "Anderson," Ripken said thoughtfully. "Robert Anderson. The Hurricane from Hagerstown. You played with my father in '73, didn't you?" Robert's eyes widened in surprise. "You remember that? Dad used to talk about you all the time," Ripken replied, his voice softening with memory. "Said you had the nastiest curveball he'd ever caught. He was devastated when you got hurt." The revelation added a new dimension to the previous night's events. Here was a man who had once been on the verge of baseball greatness, now teaching his grandson the fundamentals of the game he loved, despite having every reason to be bitter about his lost opportunity. As they worked with Tommy in the batting cage, Robert shared stories about playing with Cal Sr., and Ripken added his own memories of growing up around the ballpark. The morning took on the feeling of a family reunion rather than a practice session, with 3 generations of baseball knowledge being passed down in the early morning quiet of Camden Yards. But across town, Marcus Thompson was dealing with his own demons. The The phone call he'd received before the confrontation had been from his father's nurse. The elder Thompson, once a powerful figure in Baltimore's business community, was now in the final stages of a devastating illness. Their last conversation had been an argument about baseball, of all things. Thompson's father had been a lifelong Orioles fan, attending games regularly until his illness confined him to a care facility. He had tried to share his love of the game with his son, but Marcus had always been more interested in the business side of things, viewing sports as just another networking opportunity. Their relationship had suffered for it, and now time was running out to make things right. The security cameras also captured something else that night, something that wouldn't be discovered until days later. After Thompson had driven away from the confrontation, he had parked in another section of the lot and watched. He saw the way Ripken interacted with the grandfather and grandson, saw the genuine connection between them, and something in his hardened businessman's heart had cracked. Back at Camden Yards, Tommy was showing remarkable improvement under Ripken's guidance. The Iron Man's patient instruction, combined with his grandfather's years of experience, was helping the boy refine his natural talent. But it was more than just baseball skills being developed that morning. It was character, respect, and the kind of wisdom that can only be passed down through generations. Robert Anderson shared with Ripken how he'd channeled his lost dreams into coaching youth baseball, helping countless kids learn not just the game, but the life lessons it could teach. He spoke of the importance of handling both victory and defeat with grace, of respecting opponents, and of never letting adversity crush your spirit. As the morning progressed, other players and coaches began arriving for the day's regular practice. Many stopped to watch the impromptu session, drawn by the sight of Cal Ripken Jr. working with the young boy and his grandfather. Word had spread about the previous night's incident, and the respect shown to Robert and Tommy by the team personnel was palpable. What none of them knew was that Marcus Thompson was about to make a decision that would add yet another layer to this unfolding story. Sitting in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success but feeling emptier than ever, he picked up his phone and made a call to the Orioles Community Relations Department. The morning session at Camden Yards was winding down when one of the team's staff members approached Ripken with a message. The Iron Man read it, his expression thoughtful, then turned to Robert and Tommy. "How would you two feel about helping me with something?" he asked. "There's a youth baseball program that could use some experienced coaches, and I think you both have something valuable to offer." Robert's eyes misted over as he understood what was being proposed. "Both of us." "Tommy's got a natural way with younger kids," Ripken observed. "And you, well, anyone who can throw a curveball that impressed my father has something worth teaching." The program, it turned out, was being funded by an anonymous donor who wanted to provide baseball instruction to underprivileged youth in Baltimore. The donor had specifically requested that the program emphasize not just athletic skills, but character development and life lessons. What they didn't know then was that Marcus Thompson had made the donation in his father's name, inspired by what he'd witnessed in the parking lot. The businessman who had seemed so angry and entitled was beginning his own journey of transformation, though it would be weeks before his identity as the donor would be revealed. As Robert and Tommy left the stadium that day, they carried with them more than just memories of a morning spent with a baseball legend. They had become part of something larger, a reminder that baseball's greatest impact often happens far from the crowds and cameras, in the quiet moments where character is built and wisdom is passed down. The security footage from that night would eventually become part of the Orioles archive, a testament to how a potentially ugly confrontation had been transformed into something meaningful. But the cameras couldn't capture the full scope of what had been set in motion, the ripple effects that would touch countless lives in the Baltimore community. Cal Ripken Jr. had done more than just defuse a tense situation in a parking lot. He had demonstrated the kind of leadership that had made him a legend in baseball, the ability to see beyond the surface of a conflict to the human stories beneath, and to find ways to bring people together rather than drive them apart. As the morning sun climbed higher over Camden Yards, casting long shadows across the empty seats, the story was far from over. The threads of connection between Thompson, the Andersons, and the broader Baltimore baseball community were just beginning to weave themselves into something remarkable. The lessons of that morning, about respect, redemption, and the healing power of baseball, would continue to resonate. Sometimes the greatest plays in baseball aren't made on the field at all, but in the hearts and minds of those who understand that the game is really about bringing people together, bridging generations, and building character. Have you ever experienced a moment where a conflict led to unexpected connections? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales from the world of sports. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll discover how Marcus Thompson's anonymous donation would impact the Baltimore community in ways nobody could have predicted. The summer heat in Baltimore had reached its peak, but the real warmth was emanating from the newly established youth baseball program that had sprung from that fateful night in the Camden Yards parking lot. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation between Marcus Thompson and Robert Anderson, and the ripple effects of Cal Ripken Jr.'s intervention were still spreading through the community like waves across the Chesapeake Bay. The program, now known as the Baltimore Diamonds Youth League, had taken root in one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. Every evening, the sound of baseball could be heard echoing from a renovated field that had, until recently, been little more than an abandoned lot. Robert Anderson and his grandson Tommy had become fixtures. Their intergenerational coaching duo drawing curious onlookers and eager young players alike. What made this particular evening different was the unexpected arrival of a black SUV at the edge of the field. Marcus Thompson sat behind the wheel, watching the practice session unfold. He hadn't returned to Camden Yards since the incident, and few knew of his connection to the program he was secretly funding. The weight of his father's signet ring felt heavy on his finger, a reminder of the man who had tried so hard to share his love of baseball with a son too busy chasing success to appreciate the game's deeper meanings. As Thompson watched, he saw Robert Anderson working with a group of young pitchers, demonstrating the same curveball grip that had once made him the talk of the Orioles' farm system. Tommy was nearby, helping kids barely younger than himself master the fundamentals of batting stance. The scene stirred something in Thompson's memory, summer evenings when his father had tried to teach him these same lessons he'd been too proud to learn. Cal Ripken Jr. chose that moment to make his own appearance at the field. He had been making regular, unannounced visits to the program, true to his reputation for understanding that real leadership happens in quiet moments, away from the spotlight. The Iron Man's presence had a way of elevating everyone around him, not through intimidation but through the quiet dignity he brought to every interaction. The security cameras from that night in the parking lot had captured something else that was only now becoming clear. In the moments before Thompson's confrontation with the Andersons, the businessman had been crying in his car. The phone call about his father's worsening condition had shattered his carefully maintained facade of control, leading to the outburst that Ripken had so skillfully defused. As Ripken walked across the field, he noticed Thompson's SUV. The baseball legend had known all along who was funding the program. His years of experience had taught him to see the potential for redemption in even the most difficult situations. Without drawing attention to Thompson's presence, Ripken made his way over to the vehicle. "Beautiful evening for baseball," Ripken said simply, leaning against the SUV's door. His voice carried the same calm authority it had that night in the parking lot, but now there was something else there, understanding, perhaps even compassion. Thompson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I didn't think anyone would notice me here." "Sometimes the best way to heal old wounds is to watch new growth," Ripken replied, nodding toward the field where Robert and Tommy continued their coaching. "Your father would be proud of what you've done here." The mention of his father caught Thompson off guard. He hadn't told anyone about the motivation behind his donation, but somehow Ripken had pieced it together. The baseball legend's insight reminded Thompson of why he had been such a successful player: the ability to read situations, to understand the human element behind the game. Meanwhile, on the field, Robert Anderson was teaching a young pitcher the importance of follow-through, not just in throwing mechanics, but in life. The old minor leaguer had found his true calling in coaching, turning the disappointment of his own shortened career into wisdom he could share with the next generation. Tommy had grown too, not just in his baseball skills but in his understanding of the game's deeper lessons. The 12-year-old who had trembled in fear during the parking lot confrontation was now confidently helping other kids master the basics of the sport. His grandfather's stories about playing with Cal Ripken Sr. had become part of the program's folklore, inspiring young players to dream big while staying grounded in the fundamentals. The security footage from that night had captured one more detail that seemed insignificant at the time but now took on new meaning. After Thompson had driven away from the confrontation, a baseball had rolled out of his SUV, an old, well-worn ball with faded signatures. It was later discovered to be from a game his father had taken him to as a child, the only baseball game they had ever attended together. As the evening practice continued, Thompson finally stepped out of his vehicle. The moment felt heavy with possibility, like the pause before a crucial pitch. Robert Anderson noticed him first, his expression momentarily clouding with memory of their last encounter. But there was something different about Thompson now. The aggressive energy was gone, replaced by an almost palpable vulnerability. Ripken watched as Thompson walked slowly toward the field. The businessman's expensive suit looked out of place among the dust and worn baseball equipment, but his step carried a determination that spoke of decisions made and bridges waiting to be built. "Mr. Anderson," Thompson called out, his voice carrying across the field. The young players paused their practice, sensing the importance of the moment. "I owe you and your grandson an apology. A real one, face to face." Robert Anderson handed his baseball to the young pitcher he'd been coaching and walked toward Thompson. Tommy joined his grandfather, no longer afraid but curious about this new development in their ongoing story. "My father," Thompson continued, his voice thick with emotion, "is in hospice care. He's been asking to watch one more baseball game, but his condition..." He paused, gathering himself. "The night in the parking lot, I just learned he probably wouldn't make it to another game. I took it out on you, and that was unforgivable." Robert Anderson's expression softened as he recognized the pain behind Thompson's words. "Baseball has a way of bringing out our deepest emotions," he said quietly. "Both the best and the worst." Cal Ripken Jr. stepped forward then, his presence somehow making the moment feel both more significant and more intimate. "What if we brought the game to him?" he suggested. The idea took root immediately. Plans were made to organize a special exhibition game at Thompson's father's care facility, featuring the young players from the Baltimore Diamonds Youth League. The elderly Thompson would get his final baseball game, but it would be more meaningful than any professional match could have been. As the details were being worked out, something remarkable happened on the field. Thompson, still in his business suit, found himself receiving an impromptu batting lesson from Robert Anderson. The former minor league pitcher shared the same techniques he'd been teaching the young players, and Thompson, for the first time in decades, allowed himself to remember the joy his father had tried to share with him through baseball. The security cameras at Camden Yards had stopped recording long ago, but the story they had captured continued to evolve. What had begun as a confrontation in a parking lot had transformed into a lesson about redemption, about the healing power of baseball, and about the connections that can be forged when people allow themselves to be vulnerable. Young Tommy Anderson watched as his grandfather taught Marcus Thompson the proper batting stance, the same lesson he had learned years ago. The boy understood that he was witnessing something important, not just about baseball, but about forgiveness and growth. Cal Ripken Jr. observed it all with quiet satisfaction. The Iron Man had seen countless games in his career, but sometimes the most important plays happened far from any official baseball diamond. The transformation he was witnessing of Thompson, of the Andersons, of the entire community, reinforced his belief in baseball's power to change lives. As the evening drew to a close, the lights of the renovated field cast long shadows across the ground. Thompson had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, his earlier rigid businessman's demeanor replaced by something more genuine. He had found something here that all his business success couldn't provide, a connection to his father's passion, and perhaps a path to making peace with their complicated relationship. The Baltimore Diamonds Youth League had become more than just a baseball program. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest victories in baseball have nothing to do with the score. They're about the connections made, the lessons learned, and the healing that can happen when people come together around a simple game with profound implications. Has baseball ever helped you heal a relationship or build unexpected connections? Share your stories in the comments below. And stay tuned for our final chapter, where we'll witness the special exhibition game that would bring this remarkable story full circle. The morning of the exhibition game dawned with a clarity that seemed almost designed for baseball. The care facility's small recreational field had been transformed overnight thanks to Marcus Thompson's resources and the dedicated work of the Baltimore Diamonds Youth League volunteers. Fresh chalk lines gleamed against the green grass, and a small set of temporary bleachers had been installed for the residents and their families. Howard Thompson, Marcus's father, had been wheeled out to a special viewing area near what would serve as the home team dugout. His once imposing frame was now fragile, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had built a business empire. He clutched an old baseball in his weakened hands, the same one that had rolled from his son's SUV that fateful night at Camden Yards. The security footage from that evening had revealed one final detail that now took on profound significance. After the confrontation, when Marcus Thompson had sat crying in his car, he had been holding that very baseball, turning it over and over in his hands. The ball bore two signatures, Cal Ripken Sr. and Cal Ripken Jr., from a game nearly 30 years ago, the only professional baseball game Howard had ever attended with his son. Cal Ripken Jr. arrived early, carrying a small duffel bag and wearing his old Orioles warm-up jacket. He made his way directly to Howard Thompson's viewing area, kneeling down beside the elderly man's wheelchair. "Mr. Thompson," Ripken said warmly, "I believe I signed this for you a long time ago." He gestured to the baseball in Howard's hands. "Would you mind if I added today's date? I think we're about to witness something special." Howard's eyes filled with tears as he handed over the baseball. "I remember that game," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Marcus was just a boy. I tried so hard to share baseball with him, but..." "Sometimes," Ripken replied gently, "it takes a lifetime to understand what our parents were trying to teach us. But it's never too late to learn." The players began arriving, young members of the Baltimore Diamonds Youth League, wearing fresh uniforms provided by their anonymous benefactor. Robert Anderson moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, while Tommy helped distribute equipment and lead warm-ups. The boy had grown into his role as a junior coach, showing a natural talent for leadership that went beyond his years. Marcus Thompson stood awkwardly at the edge of the field, still wearing a business suit despite the casual nature of the event. Robert Anderson noticed his discomfort and walked over, carrying an extra baseball cap and glove. "You know," Robert said, holding out the equipment, "we could use another coach today. These kids have been asking about the mysterious man in the suit who's been watching their practices." The gesture caught Marcus off guard. After everything that had happened in the parking lot, after all the anger he had directed at this man, here was an offer of inclusion, of belonging. He took the cap and glove with trembling hands. "I don't know if I remember how," he admitted quietly. "Baseball has a way of coming back to you," Robert replied. "Like riding a bike or coming home." The exhibition game was unlike anything the care facility had ever seen. The young players, many of whom had never known the game before joining the Baltimore Diamonds, played with a mixture of enthusiasm and newly acquired skill. But it wasn't just a display of baseball, it was a demonstration of everything the sport could teach about life, community, and redemption. Between innings, Cal Ripken Jr. shared stories about his early days in baseball, about learning the game from his father, about the streak of 2,632 consecutive games that had earned him the nickname Iron Man. But he also spoke about the importance of second chances, of learning from mistakes, of finding strength in vulnerability. Howard Thompson watched it all from his viewing area, his eyes tracking every movement on the field. When Marcus stepped up to help coach third base, wearing the borrowed cap and glove, the elderly man's face lit up with a joy that the care facility staff hadn't seen in months. The security cameras that had captured the confrontation at Camden Yards couldn't record this moment, but its impact would be remembered by everyone present. Here was the healing power of baseball in action, not just in the game being played, but in the connections being forged and restored. Tommy Anderson, taking his turn at bat, looked over at his grandfather for guidance. Robert gave him the same subtle signals they'd practiced countless times, the baseball wisdom of generations flowing from one to another. The boys hit a clean single to right field, brought cheers from both teams. As the game progressed, something remarkable happened. Marcus Thompson, initially stiff and uncertain in his coaching role, began to relax. The baseball instincts his father had tried to instill in him decades ago started to surface. He found himself calling out encouragement to the young players, sharing tips about base running that he didn't even realize he remembered. Between innings, Marcus made his way to his father's viewing area. Howard reached out with a shaking hand, and his son took it without hesitation. "I'm sorry," Marcus said softly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." Howard squeezed his son's hand. "You understand now. That's what matters." Cal Ripken Jr. watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. The Iron Man had seen countless moments of baseball drama in his career, but few as meaningful as this one. The game that had given him so much was once again proving its power to transform lives and heal wounds. As the exhibition game entered its final innings, the score seemed almost irrelevant. What mattered was the joy on Howard Thompson's face as he watched his son fully embrace the sport he had always loved. What mattered was the pride in Robert Anderson's eyes as he saw his grandson teaching younger players the fundamentals of the game. What mattered was the sense of community that had grown from a moment of conflict in a parking lot. The Baltimore Diamonds Youth League had become more than just a baseball program. It was a living testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest victories happen far from the professional diamonds, in the small moments of connection and understanding that the game makes possible. After the final out, as the players and spectators mingled on the field, Cal Ripken Jr. gathered everyone around home plate. He held up the baseball that Howard Thompson had kept all these years, now bearing a fresh signature and today's date. Baseball, Ripken began, is often called America's pastime. But it's more than just a game. It's a bridge between generations, a teacher of life's most important lessons, and sometimes, a path to healing. What started in a parking lot at Camden Yards has become something beautiful, a reminder that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to forgive. Marcus Thompson stood with his arm around his father's wheelchair, the borrowed baseball cap still on his head. Robert and Tommy Anderson stood nearby, their presence a reminder of how a moment of conflict had transformed into an opportunity for connection. The security footage from that night at Camden Yards would eventually become part of a different kind of baseball legend, not about home runs or spectacular catches, but about the power of the game to bring people together, to heal old wounds, and to teach lessons that go far beyond the diamond. Howard Thompson passed away peacefully 2 weeks after the exhibition game, the baseball from that day clutched in his hands. But his legacy lived on in the Baltimore Diamonds Youth League, in the transformed heart of his son, and in the countless young players who would learn not just baseball, but life lessons on that renovated field. Marcus Thompson continued his anonymous support of the league, but now he was also a regular presence at practices and games, learning alongside the young players the lessons his father had tried to teach him so many years ago. Robert and Tommy Anderson became his closest friends, their shared love of baseball bridging the gulf that had once seemed insurmountable. Cal Ripken Jr.'s intervention in a parking lot confrontation had sparked something remarkable, a reminder that baseball's greatest impact often happens in the quiet moments, in the small gestures of understanding and forgiveness, in the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Have you ever witnessed a moment where sports brought healing to a broken relationship? Share your stories in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most important plays in life happen far from any stadium, in the moments when we choose to see beyond our differences and find common ground in the games we love. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories from the world of sports. This has been the remarkable tale of how a parking lot confrontation at Camden Yards became a story of redemption, healing, and the enduring power of baseball to change lives.